All right, welcome to week 18, everyone, and the possibility of evil and what a thought. I cannot believe we're already in the middle of May. Oh my goodness. I always encourage you to watch the weekly overview videos. I think it's helpful to have a face and a voice to guide you through the assignments. And this week, you are reading two stories by Shirley Jackson, The Possibility of Evil and What a Thought. Neither story contains any supernatural elements whatsoever, just creepy people, just unsettling and maybe very unpleasant people, but not supernatural people. So, no supernatural in either story this week. So, where do you find these stories? Well, they are posted in the Week 18 folder, as usual. They are also posted in the library folder. So, they are the very last items in the library folder. You can probably find them if you Google the stories and the author, but they're right here for you. Please pardon the copy of Possibility of Evil. It's a PDF from the internet, and it has some little notes in it like read this and chunk this. Ignore those little notes. You'll see what I mean when you read it. I thought I had edited them out, but I hadn't. All right, so you have two assignments due this week that are going to be due on May 14th. I, of course, accept late work, but if you want to stay on track, please get this stuff in by May 14th. You have a response writing and a discussion, so let's talk about what those are this week. All right, you have a response writing for either Possibility of Evil or What a Thought. You guys know the drill on this. MLA header and format, minimum 1 page. Of course, it can be longer. MLA in-text citations for all quotes or any references to the story, and choose your prompt from the selections below. So please, before we talk about the prompts, please make sure, my friends, that you are really doing these MLA citations. You're really giving me the format and the header. Lots of people are skipping this, and as you can see on the rubric, you're throwing away some easy points. All right, let's talk about the prompts for your response writing. You have options. You have 4 options, in fact. Option 1 goes to the possibility of evil. Are Miss Strangeworth's actions the result of premeditated malice or uncontrollable impulse? What is the difference between the two? You're going to want to probably look up the definitions of malice and impulse for this one, but you can talk about the whole story in terms of how dangerous is she really, right? Impulse or malice? Is she setting out with the intent to hurt people, or can she just not stop herself? The option 2 also goes to possibility of evil. Discuss who holds power in this story. Is it Miss Strangeworth and her judgment of the townspeople? Is it the people she judges as they occupy so much of her mental energy? Who is controlling who? This is a really interesting story because on the question and story, but on the surface you might say it's Mrs. Strangeworth. She is the one writing the nasty letters to her neighbors and making them feel bad, but they occupy her entire mental space. She thinks about them, she judges them, she writes these letters. They take up all of her time. So who's really pulling the strings? You could have quite a discussion here about this. Okay, option 3 goes to what a thought. Same question as option 1. Are Margaret's actions the result of premeditated malice or uncontrollable impulse? And what is the difference between the two? So, same question, different character. Margaret does something a lot more dangerous than Miss Strangeworth does, right? It's not just letter writing that she is guilty of. So, is she premeditated in her actions, or is it just an uncontrollable impulse? You might want to look up the definitions of these and really pull into the story, dig in there and find specific examples of what you are arguing. The 4th option goes to what a thought. Pretend as though it is after the story ends and Margaret is being tried in court for murder. What should she be charged with? What punishment should she serve, if any? Be specific. For this option, you do want to look up some things. You're going to want to look up the different definitions of assault and murder because they're very different in legal terminology. There's different degrees of assault, there's different degrees of murder. Write this as though you were the lawyer and you were arguing for or against, your choice, Margaret in court. All right. So you get to play Law and Order here for my potential pre-law students out there. This one's for you. Pretend you are writing up the legal brief for Margaret. You're getting ready to go to court. So you're going to want to look up some legal definitions in order to strengthen your writing. Choose at least one option. Obviously, you have to do at least one of them. You can do a second response writing for extra credit as long as you get all of the week's work in. That includes, one response writing and the discussion. Okay, so the discussion is right here. Mrs. Strangeworth and Margaret. In this discussion, tell me how Miss Strangeworth and Margaret are similar and how they are different. Is one more dangerous than the other? Is one more likely to keep on committing her crimes? Is one more likely to be able to stop and become a good person? Is there a common motivation or tick that you feel drives these two women? Talk to me. Talk to me about how these two characters intersect, how they're similar, how they're different. Basically, just talk to me about these two. You can compare and contrast. Do you see something that drives both of them? Do you think one's more dangerous than the other? That's an interesting question in this. Could one stop? Maybe maybe one did a more dangerous thing, but she could possibly never do it again, and maybe one is gonna do continue to write nasty letters to her neighbors and friends for the rest of her life. She'll never stop. I don't know. You make the decision. Okay, you have the audio readings of both of these stories available to you, The Possibility of Evil and What a Thought. Again, I think it's helpful to have the story open and read along as you're listening, but audio readings are, if that's what works for you, then totally use these. That's why they're there. Okay, so let's talk about the possibility of evil. Let's talk about this story. I know I've always say this about her stories, but I just love Shirley Jackson so much. I find her stories so fascinating, and she writes them about small towns. We are going to, in the weeks to come, talk about the idea of why small towns? Why does she focus on small towns and not big cities? People tend to think maybe the big city is more dangerous than the small town. I'm going to move to a small town so I'll be safer. Shirley Jackson says, would tell you, no, not safer, not safer at all, right? All right, so in The Possibility of Evil, we start off with Miss Adela Strangeworth stepped daintily along Main Street on her way to the grocery. The sun was shining, the air was fresh and clean after the night's heavy rain. Everything in Mrs. Strangeworth's little town looked washed and bright. Mrs. Strangeworth took deep breaths and thought there was nothing in the world like a fragrant summer day. This is just idyllic, perfect small town life, isn't it? Here's this little old lady who has the world's best last name, Mrs. Strangeworth. I mean, do you get a better last name than that, really? And she's just having the best day. It is a sunny, beautiful day. The sun's shining, and she is walking down the street to go to the grocery. Nothing's going to get in her way. She's in the grocery. She does her shopping. She chats with some people on her way out. It says, carrying her little bag of groceries, Mrs. Strangeworth came out of the store into the bright sunlight and stopped to smile down on the Crane baby. Dawn and Helen Crane were really the two most infatuated parents she had ever known, she thought indulgently, looking at the delicately embroidered baby cap and the lace-edged carriage cover. That little girl is going to grow up expecting luxury all her life, she said to Helen Crane. So this is also really normal. The little old lady, seeing the young couple with the baby and cooing over it, and then giving her that kind of, maybe half joking, maybe half serious, a little like, don't indulge her too much, maybe unsolicited old lady advice here. And Miss Helen Crane, and she trusts her a little bit, and she trusts her with this little insecurity that she has. She says, 6 months Tuesday, Helen Crane said, looking down with rapt wonder at her child. I've been worrying, though, about her. Do you think don't you think she ought to move around more, try to sit up, for instance? So she trusts Mrs. Strangeworth with an insecurity she's having about her baby. And by the way, when you're a parent, these insecurities just plague you because what the truth of it is that every baby's different. They all do things on their own time. But the books and the manuals are all going to tell you, oh, no, no, it happens at this time. So Helen Crane's having that parental insecurity here, and she expresses it. She trusts Mrs. Strangeworth with it. Probably a mistake, right? Mrs. Strangeworth seems just like the world's most normal little old lady. She goes home, she makes her lunch, she has a cup of tea, she's just, her afternoon is just buzzing right along, and then she sits down to write some letters. Although Mrs. Strangeworth's desk held trimmed quill pen and a gold frosted fountain pen, Mrs. Strangeworth always used a dull stub of a pencil when she wrote her letters, and she printed them in a childish block print. After thinking for a minute, although she had been phrasing the letter in the back of her mind all the way home, she wrote on a pink sheet, "Don't don't you ever see an idiot? Didn't you ever see an idiot child before? Some people just shouldn't have children, should they?" Oh, this is a note she's going to send to Helen Crane anonymously. And it's not just her. She has several notes she's going to write to her neighbors this week. After thinking for a minute, she decided she would like to write another letter, perhaps to Mrs. Harper, to follow up on the one she had already mailed. She selected a green sheet this time and wrote quickly, "Have you found out yet what they were all laughing about after you left the bridge club on Thursday? Or is the wife really the last one to know?" Oh, nasty little bits of paranoia and gossip. Mrs. Strangeworth never concerned herself with facts. Her letters dealt with more negotiable stuff of suspicion. I, so she just goes right to the rumors and the gossip and the nastiness. She don't care if it's true. She's going to send a nasty little anonymous letter to you. Mrs. Strangeworth sighed and turned away. There was so much evil in people, even in a charming little town like this one. There was still so much evil in people. So she takes her little letters and she walks herself down on this beautiful summer evening. Nothing's going to go wrong. She's done this so many times before, after all. And she goes to the mailbox and she says she slipped her letters into the slot. Two of them fell inside. The third caught on the edge and fell outside onto the ground at Miss Strangeworth's feet. She did not notice it. This is where she messes up, because somebody does notice. One of the teenagers that's hanging around, who it seems is also the victim of one of her nasty letters. He's like, this is such small town stuff, because he's like, I'll just go walk it over to this guy's house, that'll be faster than mailing it. I'm gonna walk by there anyway. I'll just walk by and drop it on his doorstep. Well, now she has a witness. This kid saw her mail the letter. This guy's gonna open the letter and see what nasty things she's written. She's busted. Flash forward to the next morning, after supposedly everybody's like, oh my gosh, I got one of those letters too. Mrs. Strangeworth Mrs. Strangeworth was a Strangeworth of Pleasant Street. Her hand did not shake as she opened the envelope and unfolded the sheet of green paper inside. She began to cry silently for the wickedness of the world when she read the words, "Look at what used to be your roses." So, what revenge did the people of this town reap upon this nasty old lady? What revenge did they reap upon her? All right. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at this now on the big screen and I'm seeing all these typos that are in this story. That's what happens when you download stuff from the internet, huh? So anyway, you guys get the idea. I love this story. On the surface, charming, maybe a little bit eccentric little old lady who, in her free time, likes to torment her neighbors by writing them these evil little notes. Oh! All right, let's talk about the other story. What a thought. This one is a little bit more Machiavellian, if you will. So let's go to Margaret and her husband having just finished dinner and a perfectly lovely, seemingly perfect suburban house in a small town. Dinner had been good. Margaret sat with her book on her lap and watched her husband digesting, an operation to which he always gave much time and thought. As she watched, he put his cigar down without looking and used his free hand to turn the page of his paper. Margaret found herself thinking with some pride that unlike many men she had heard about, her husband did not fall asleep after he'd had a good dinner. There's nothing wrong here, right? You wouldn't think anything's wrong here. She's made her husband a beautiful dinner. She's just thinking how great a guy he is. But then this idea popped into her head. The idea of smashing the glass ashtray over her husband's head had never before occurred to Margaret, but now it would not leave her mind. She stirred uneasily in her chair, thinking, what a terrible thought to have. Whatever made me think such a thing? Probably a perverted, affectionate gesture. And she laughed. Margaret, her husband called. Yes. Is something wrong? No, dear, Margaret said, just getting a drink of water. Poison him, push him in front of a car, a train. She is all of a sudden plagued with all of these thoughts. How is she going to kill him? Smash him with an ashtray, poison him, put him in front of a car, a train? How's she going to kill him? And she can't get him out of her head. She's not acting on them yet, but they are running through her head nonstop. And then she starts to think about, well, what if I really did it? What if it really happened? What would I do? What would I do without him? She wondered. How would I live? Who would ever marry me? Where would I go? What would I do with all the furniture? Crying when I saw his picture, burning his old letters. I could give his suits away, but what would I do with the house? Who would take care of the income tax? I love my husband, Margaret told herself emphatically. I must stop thinking like this. It's like an idiot tune running through my head. So she keeps saying, I don't want to do this. I love my husband. But at the same time, she's thinking, what are the practical matters of killing my husband? Oh, no, I'd have to find someone else to do my income tax. What would I do with the furniture? She's thinking these incredibly rational thoughts about murder here. And then she keeps having these urges racing through her head. They say if you soak a cigarette in water overnight, the water will be almost pure nicotine by morning and deadly poisonous. You could put it in coffee and it won't taste. Have you any enemies? She asked her husband, not meaning to. Enemies, he said. For a moment he took her seriously. Then he smiled and said, I suppose I have hundreds, secret ones. So she's they're impulse thoughts, but she's also demonstrating that maybe she's taking these a little bit too seriously because she's also having a how would I get away with it moment here. Who could I blame it on? How would I get away with the crime? Do you have any enemies, meaning people I could blame it on? I never loved you more, she said, and he reached up without looking to touch her hair affectionately. I don't want to, she said as she struck him. So this story ends with her bashing her husband in the head with that big glass ashtray she at first caught her eye, all the while saying, I don't want to do it. I don't know why I'm doing it. This story scares me because think of all the times when you're with your family and your loved ones, and they're just kind of like staring off into space or they're acting a little odd, and you're like, oh, they're probably fine. Who knows? Are they thinking of murder? Probably not. I mean, really. But Shirley Jackson took it there, right? She wrote this as though that really was the what if of what happens what are people really thinking behind what they're saying that they're thinking. So this is a really interesting story about impulsivity because can you call it real impulsivity? Really, can you really say it's impulsive if she has these rational thoughts about what would I do? How would I clean it up? Who would take care of the income tax? And also, how would I get away with it? Do you have enemies? How would I get away with this crime? Can you actually call it impulsive behavior? Would that stand up in a court? I mean, I don't know how you'd prove her thought pattern. You'd have to prove that she actually took action here. And is she actually dangerous? Would she go out and do this again? Or is she likely to be a one time, this is the only crime she's ever going to commit her whole life? All right, so let's talk a little bit about impulsive behavior here before we depart. Impulsive behavior in general, is it dangerous? We all do this. Impulsive behavior, meaning those things you do without thinking, right? Stuff you do without really thinking through the consequences of your actions. We all do it. And Stanford ran a bunch of research and a bunch of studies on this, and it says that researchers say, yeah, maybe it is dangerous, but maybe it also has some benefits. Maybe impulsive behavior is also an integral part of our brain makeup. Maybe we have to have impulsive behavior in order to stay safe. It benefits younger people. Younger people tend to be more impulsive than older people, according to studies. But would that keep you alive? Would that help keep you alive in maybe a dangerous situation? Would an older person perhaps weigh the options too much and not act, where a younger person might jump and act, impulsively and save their lives? Perhaps, right? So, impulsive behavior and psychopathy. Psychopathy meaning the your tendency towards mental illness or towards destructive mental behavior, destructive towards yourself or to other people. Researchers at Stanford used this scale, this rating scale, to rate how impulsive a person might be and how that might affect their decision making. The idea behind this study was basically to see if people who rated really high on an impulsive behavior scale, like these 9 questions here, was their behavior more dangerous, or maybe did it fall into the psychotic category, where people are beginning to not lose their capacity for empathy, lose their capacity to relate to others, lose their capacity to seek consequences for their actions. So there's 9 questions here. We'll go through this pretty fast here in this video, but you can certainly see this in the PowerPoint that's in the Week 18 folder. Don't make enemies because you never know who may be useful in the future. You're supposed to rate these from 1, completely disagree, to 5, completely agree. It is necessary to get important people on your side. I am good at keeping secrets about myself. When I have a good hand of cards, my face gives it away. If I don't like someone, I come right out and say it. It is not wise to tell your secrets. You might have to surrender one battle to win the war. I'm willing to wait to get back at people. Attacking people directly rarely works. So, yeah, rate yourself and see. They would say that if you range really high on this, maybe you have very impulsive behavior. It doesn't necessarily mean you're a psychopath. But anyhow, you can go back and check this out slower in the PowerPoint. Impulsive behavior and age. So in humans, impulsive behavior typically peaks in adolescence, when the prefrontal areas of the brain continue to develop, or soon after in the young adult years, when it's culturally expected that people will test their limits. So you guys know this probably because your parents and your teachers have been telling you this forever, but your brain isn't actually fully formed until you're in your early 20s. Ladies, your brains fully form a little earlier than your male counterpoints. That's just biology. That's not bias there. So you guys have quite a while. You're going to be in your early 20s before your brain has actually, fully formed, basically. So they say that impulsive behavior peaks during this time when your brain is still kind of forming, it's still not quite fully developed. Younger people tend to be more impulsive than older people. And as you saw in that our first discussion about this, maybe that's kind of an evolutionary trait that's supposed to help you with survival. The ability to make an impulsive, quick decision could save your life, right? Whereas if I sat back and weighed all the options and thought everything out, I might get eaten by the tiger, right? While you got away. So impulsive behavior can also be the result of latent fears or insecurities. So this is one of the examples from this Stanford study from one of the patients. One of his patients, he said, recently called her boyfriend at work, who told her he couldn't talk just then. He was swamped. She took that to mean he was about to dump her. She called him back immediately after hanging up and broke up with him on the spot as a preemptive strike, Dr. Gabbard said. So yeah, this is really extreme. I mean, can you imagine being the boyfriend on the other end of this phone call, like, oh my God, call me back after lunch, and then she calls back and dumps him. Like, oh my goodness. So, but this comes out of insecurity. She thought she was about to get dumped, and so I'm going to dump you first before you dump me, right? So sometimes impulsive behavior can be the result of a fear, basically. So the last guiding thought here, and as it relates to these 2 short stories that you guys have read this week, are impulsive thoughts dangerous? The way I think of it is that one factor has to do with the urges people have, and the other has to do with the brakes they apply. So research tends to show that it's not the thoughts and urges themselves that are dangerous, but rather the ability to control your actions. So Margaret has these thoughts, right? I mean, the whole story is called What a Thought. She has thoughts. I could bash his head in with the ashtray. I could poison his coffee. I could push him in front of a train. But research would say that's not necessarily dangerous unless she can't put the brakes on it. She can't control her behavior, which in the story she can't. She actually does hit him in the head with the ashtray, right? Uh, so that's where she becomes dangerous. In Possibility of Evil, Mrs. Strangeworth has an impulse to write these letters, to dig into the gossip, she gets some kind of charge off of watching people get upset and seeing how insecure people get. So she's doing this thing. Is it the impulse to do that, or is it the kind of secret joy that maybe she gets from gossip? Is that dangerous? Or is it rather the fact that she cannot control her actions to further the gossip, to stoke the fire, to really make people feel bad? What's where do these two women walk the line in being maybe normal in their impulsivity and dangerous in their actions? And an interesting question that I always ask with these stories is one more likely to be able to stop their behavior? Is Margaret likely to ever bash somebody's head in again? Or is she pretty much, that was it, the one time she was ever going to do it? Is Miss Strangeworth likely to ever give up her letter writing habit? Or could she be sitting in another small town far, far away and still writing her letters? Interesting to think about. All right, guys, and the last slide here is the works cited for all those little factoids about impulsivity. Really interesting stuff out there about this. So if you're into psychology, I highly encourage you to check out more on it. All right, my friends, that's all I got for this week. Don't go away. We'll talk about this a little bit in our Zoom meeting. And if you have any questions, just put them all in the chat. Thank you.